jumped off, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that's actually a good thing. So all of your chatter didn't get recorded, so we're starting fresh. So okay, here we are on page 49, third letter, the third letter to the same Reverend Mother that he's been writing to, who had the dark night of the soul, and he's trying to encourage her, get her back on track, and so on and so forth. So third letter, Reverend and Most Honored Mother, I received from Miss D.N. the rosaries which you gave her for me. I am surprised that you have not told me what you think of the book I sent you. Do I detect a little rebuke there?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You should have received it by now. Practice its teaching in your old age. It is better late than never.
Ouch.
Yeah. You know, but one of the things that this kind of spoke to me about is that he received 2 books from another nun, or I think it was a nun, and or another woman anyway, and he sent one to her because it was on the presence of God. So it's not like Brother Lawrence is unique in bringing this to the fore, even then, you know, in the 17th century. But he has a kind of a unique way of approaching this, I think, is what really has endeared Brother Lawrence for the last 300 years to us. But it was kind of interesting. You know, there are already other publications about God's presence, and he sent this one to her, and he expected some kind of feedback, and he didn't get it. So he's you know, poking her a little bit there. He says, I cannot understand how religious people can live contented lives without the practice of the presence of God. For myself, I withdraw as much as I can to the deepest recesses of my soul with him. And while I am thus with him, I fear nothing. That idea of withdrawing, in the other translation I was telling you about, he translated it as keep myself at rest with God. So if that works for you too, for myself, I keep myself at rest with God as much as I can, or withdraw as much as I can to the deepest recesses of my soul with him. And while I am thus with him, I fear nothing. But the least turning away from him is hell for me. This exercise does not weary the body. The other translation was kill the body. As a matter of fact, it is appropriate from time to time, and even often, to deprive it of many little harmless and allowable pleasures. The other one was innocent and lawful consolations. So interesting how you can choose many different words to try to translate. So what is he talking about here? He says, well, I am with him, I fear nothing, but the least turning away from him is hell for me. And then he talks about this exercise of withdrawing or keeping myself at rest with God. He says, this exercise does not weary or kill the body. As a matter of fact, it's appropriate from time to time, and even often to deprive it of many little harmless and allowable pleasures.
Like watching a baseball game.
Like watching a baseball game?
Yeah.
Kind of. If I'd be saying not watching the baseball game, or watching the baseball game is what kills your body.
No. He's saying it's watching a baseball game is a lawful and not harmful thing to do, but at times you have to withdraw from even that.
Okay. Of course, some would feel watching the baseball game is the punishment. So it depends on where you're coming from.
Only when we're losing.
See, Allison is agreeing with me. She knows what I'm talking about. Actually, I love baseball, but I get that everybody else doesn't. But the kind of thing he's talking about here is like fasting, right? It would be like fasting. It would be, you know, whether you're fasting food or fasting something else that you love to do. But why would we want to do this? Why do you fast anyway? Is it just simply to deprive yourself, to punish yourself, to take away pleasures? You know, what is the purpose of fasting, and why would you want to do this?
Would that be something that a person was trying to work with themselves?
Okay.
I would submit that it's he's not depriving himself so much as he is focusing himself more on the relationship that he has with God.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a focusing inward, right? If you start to shut off some of the sensory input and activity maybe that you're doing, You can focus more inward. And it's also a focus away from relying on outward comforts and consolations and circumstances for any kind of happiness or any kind of sense of reliance, but more of a finding this inside out contentment. So fasting does several things at the same time. And this is what he's kind of talking about. You know, it's turning away from those things for a time and often to be able to refocus and reprioritize, I suppose. For God does not allow a soul entirely devoted to him to have any other pleasure than with him. This is entirely reasonable. Okay, it may not sound entirely reasonable to us. God sounds a little maniacal in that statement, but this is his cultural way. This is his idiomatic way of speaking about this. And we've talked about that a lot. You know, it's not God who is not allowing or God who is jealously guarding our time, but if we don't really focus on God, if we don't have these times where we refocus, then we're going to miss his presence. We're going to be too distracted. We're just going to be, you know, inside the pinball machine with everything firing at once. And we're just going to not be able to be aware of God's presence. That making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he continues. I am not saying that to do this, it is necessary to curb oneself unreasonably. No, we must serve God in a holy freedom. We must do our work faithfully, without distress or anxiety, recalling our mind to God calmly and tranquilly whenever we find it distracted from him. Okay, so now he's pulling back from kind of the hard line it sounded like in the previous paragraph. So he's not saying that we are curbing ourselves unreasonably. So this isn't a real strict thing. This isn't like self-flagellation or some of the other things. But so he's kind of loosening his grip on that. And the most important thing here, I think, is that we must do our work. We must serve God in a holy freedom, do our work faithfully without distress or anxiety. So this isn't supposed to be a closed fist kind of practice of presence. You know, we're not becoming food Nazis about this whole thing. You know, it's still in a sense of freedom, lack of restriction, without distress or anxiety, but kind of calmly, tranquilly, gently bringing our mind back to God when we find ourselves distracted. Those of you who practice centering prayer, the way that Thomas Keating describes it, when you say the sacred word is to bring you back from the distractions. But it's not something that you're injecting forcefully. You're not trying to eject the unwanted thoughts. He says you lay the sacred word down as if it's a feather on absorbent cotton, was the way he described it in one of his books. It's just this real gentle laying down that then displaces the thoughts that have come in and crowded out any sense of presence. And this is, I think, what Brother Lawrence is talking about as well. Without distress or anxiety, in a sense of holy freedom, right? We do our work faithfully, just allowing God's presence to come back in as we refocus on what's happening right now. So it's kind of a big exhale. It's just a return to that sense of presence, but it shouldn't be something that is, you know, gritted teeth. And I think that's an important point, because a lot of the things that he says when he starts talking more in that cultural Catholic way, it really sounds like it's a grind, and it shouldn't be a grind.
I don't know that I don't think he's thinking of it as a grind or saying that it is a grind. I think what he's saying is that this connection occurs when you just clear out all that other stuff and focus in on your work with God, and that is tranquil, as he says. It's calm, and you know, as he says, recalling our mind to God calmly and tranquilly whenever we find it distracted from him. It doesn't mean every second of the day that he's walking in a pious mode. I believe that he is just saying that when you're in that place with God, that is tranquil and calm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I see it. And when I pray, that's how I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. He does say in the previous paragraph that it does distress him when he finds himself wandering off and distracted. He says it's hell for him when that happens. So he is trying to maintain that constant flow, that constant awareness. But he said
Well-
that when he finds himself out, it shouldn't be that you're just trying to really grin and bear it every moment. As John was saying, yeah, it should be calm and tranquil and just returning to God's presence. No condemnation that you wandered off. That's just who we are, right? Brother Lawrence.
Isn't it like prayer though?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Isn't it like prayer? Like we say, like there's times when I'm in real distress and I'm in prayer and I'm really focused. And then there's other times that my prayers come across like a duty dance, that in the beginning I really mean intent. And then it's like, oh my gosh, did I remember to do blah, blah, blah? Oh, and then I have to come back with the breath. It's like with meditation, that being present with the breath, that it brings me back to the moment, not allowing my mind to wander. Because I have to admit, that's pretty sad in prayer, that I'm praying and I'm grateful, and then I get to my request, and then I'm like the pinball machine.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what he's talking about, Lori. In fact, he describes that almost exactly earlier on in the book, where he had to fight his thoughts at the beginning of his time as a monk, when he was learning how to pray contemplatively. It was a real struggle for him. He was always struggling with his thoughts. So it took him a while to be able to get to the place he's talking about now. But he describes almost the exact same experience. And any one of us who have tried centering prayer meditation or just living through the day experience exactly the same thing. Our minds are all over the place. Most of the people that I talk to, if I ask them, if you could can you put a percentage on how often you are thinking about something other than what you're doing at the moment, what would that percentage be? Okay, Ken, you're laughing. What would that percentage be?
Oh, 90%. Easy.
There you go. That's usually what I get. I get between 80 and 90%. I had someone say 99.9% of the time, I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. Now the actual someone actually did a clinical research on this, and they came up overall in the population 49% of the time. So half the time people are not thinking about what they're doing. But by the time someone is contacting me for counseling, which means they're in some kind of distress, that number is up to the 80 and 90th percentile, because they've got a lot going on. They're thinking constantly about things. So typically that's what's going on. So, and then if you think about the content of your mind wandering, when you're not thinking about what you do and your mind is wandering off, is that content typically negative or positive?
Oh yeah, it's negative.
It's overwhelmingly negative, because those are the things that we ruminate on. Those are the things we're constantly thinking about. The things that are not done, the things that hurt, the things that are traumatic in some way or just annoying. Those are the things that we run over and over in our head. So if 80 to 90% of your day is thinking about something other than you're doing, and 80 or 90% of that content is negative, is it any wonder that we're not having a good day? So this is what this, either the continuous prayer of Paul, the practice of presence of Brother Lawrence, just contemplative, mindful presence in general. That's what it's doing. It's focusing back on the moment, which is the only place that we're going to meet God. Remember, he's always at the corner of here and now. So the only place we'll meet him is here and now. And if you think about it, most of our moments are good. Temperature is good. You're fed. There's a roof over your head. Something's going on. So most of the moments, if we were really in them, would be experienced positively. And once our presence is there, it's meeting God's presence and the presence of whoever we're sharing the moment with. It would transform our days and transform our experience if we could just stay present. And this is the kind of experience that Brother Lawrence is talking about.
What happens when you have to switch what you're doing?
Your thoughts go with what you're doing. Our goal is to keep our head where our feet are. Never heard that one before? Keep your head where your feet are. Keep your thoughts on the thing that you're doing. As the task changes, as the conversation changes, you stay with what you're doing. What we're trying to do is to limit the mind wandering. That doesn't mean that you never think abstractly. That doesn't mean that there isn't ever a time for your mind to go unconstrained into an abstract place that's separated from what you're doing at the moment. But those should be the punctuation marks in your day. It's like a prairie dog that pops its head up to look around at the terrain, make sure there's no predators, and then goes back down into the burrow where he lives. It's the same thing with us. Yes, we pop up, get that longer look, think about the past, think about the future, learn from the past, plan for the future, and then come back down into the moment where we actually live. Our problem is we go up into abstract land and then we never come back in for a landing. We're just circling the airport up there. And the practice of presence is going to bring us back in for a landing. And that's where we want to spend most of our time, because that's where we live. It changes everything. Okie dokie. Now, for those of you who are with us yesterday, check out this next paragraph, last night. It is necessary, however, to put our complete trust in God, putting aside all other cares, even certain devotions, which, though very good in themselves, are often engaged in for the wrong reasons, since these devotions are only the means to attain the end. Thus, since by this exercise of the presence of God, we are with him who is our end, it is useless for us to resort to the means, but we can continue our communion of love with him, living in his holy presence, at one time by an act of adoration, of praise, of desire, at another time by an act of resignation, of thanksgiving, and in any other ways our spirits can conceive. Last night, the conversations was kicked off by Patricia, who asked, how do we go from faith to total trust? And I think what he's doing is he's kind of giving us an answer to that question. He says it's necessary to put our complete trust in God, putting aside all other cares, even certain devotions or rituals, which, though very good in themselves, are often engaged in for the wrong reasons, since these devotions are only the means to attain the end. Often even centering prayer itself. If we get so focused on the centering prayer and how to do it right, and to make sure that we get our centering prayer time, it can become an end in itself. So the actual means to the end of being present to God becomes the end in itself. It becomes just a piety, just a ritual that we do, and kind of divorced from the reason that we do it. That's what he's talking about here. So whether it's going to church, whether it's reading your daily devotional, or whatever it is that you set yourself up to do, which is great, he's saying that. But if it becomes the end in itself, as if you check that box because you got it done, or imagine that somehow you got a brownie point from God because you did your deed today, then we've lost the real connection here. Thus, he says, since by this exercise of the presence of God, we are with him who is our end, God is the end, right? Not the ritual itself. It's useless for us to resort to the means, but we can continue our communion of love with him, living in his holy presence, at one time by an act of adoration, of praise, of desire, at another time by an act of resignation, of thanksgiving, and any other way that our spirit can conceive. So I think what he's talking about here is that way to complete trust, which would be a complete immersion in God's presence, is done just a step at a time. It's just one moment at a time that we continue to connect with him. Whatever it is, just that little act, he calls it adoration or praise or desire. Those little acts, those momentary acts, create that string of pearls. It's like every time that you connect with God, it's another pearl on the string, and eventually you've got the necklace. But it's done moment by moment. We talked about this last night. How do we get to that place of complete trust? Well, it's through experience of God's trustworthiness, that happens moment by moment when we clear everything out and we have this other experience, another experience of God's presence. That making sense?
Yes.
Yes. Mhm.
So that idea of means and ends, I think, is really important for us to make sure that we're keeping those two straight, and that we're using the means to get to the end. Chuang Tzu, who was one of the founders of the Taoist tradition in China, he had a great little saying that you probably have heard me quote before. Many of you heard me quote before, but he says, the purpose of a fish trap is to catch a fish. And once the fish is caught, the trap is forgotten. The purpose of a rabbit snare is to catch a rabbit. But once the rabbit is caught, the snare is forgotten. And he says the purpose of words is to convey ideas. But once the idea is conveyed, the words are forgotten. Where can I find a man or a woman who has forgotten words? That's the one I want to talk to. I love that saying.
Mhm.
So the purpose of contemplative prayer is to catch God. But once God is caught, the prayer can be forgotten. And this is the essence of the ancient hesychastic prayer of the primitive Christians, the 1st and 2nd century Christians, is that they would say prayers sometimes hundreds of times a day, until there was a point at which they said the prayer was saying them rather than they saying the prayer. In other words, it got worked so deep down into their procedural memory that they were living that presence, living that awareness, and didn't have to consciously perform it anymore. They had forgotten the words, they had forgotten the prayer, because they had immersed themselves in the end rather than the means. And so I think it's important for us to keep that in mind as we're trying to practice presence. It's not the doing of these things that's important, but where it takes us. And I think that's how we get to that total trust that we were talking about last night. It's piece by piece, step by step, experience by experience that adds up to something. When we've forgotten the prayer, when we've forgotten the means, when they're just a part of who we are, that's, I think, when we start to experience this trust. Let me ask, Lori, how's that sitting with you?
I really like that. That's a beautiful thought. You know, coming from a background of performance-based, well-intentioned, it was well-intentioned, but it becomes okay, I went and did something kind for somebody, check. I said my prayers, check. And then I realized that I was praying, my prayers were almost like treating God like a transaction. I did this, now you need to do that for me. It's kind of sad, because I thought I was really being meaningful with my prayers, but it wasn't until I started walking in a different direction that I was like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, because I was treating you transactional.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think you got the point precisely, exactly. I asked Lori because she had confided in me that she felt like she was so behind the class right now, and trying to catch up. So just wanted to see how my long-winded explanation sat with you. So thank you for that. That's spot on.
She is absolutely.
You're at the head of the class, Lori. Doing well. Judy, were you going to say something? Did I cut you off, dear?
No.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
again.
All right. Well, let's finish off letter 3. He says, do not be discouraged by the resistance you will encounter from your human nature. Okay, that's going right back to even what Lori was talking about and some of the others. It's hard to do this. We are working against the way our egoic mind works. Our egoic mind does not want to be ignored. That's what it's telling you. I'm not going to be ignored over here. Are you kidding me? So it's going to fight you tooth and nail every step of the way and try to reassert itself. So don't be discouraged by the resistance you will encounter from your human nature. You must go against your human inclinations. Often in the beginning, you will think that you are wasting time. but you must go on, be determined, and persevere in it until death, despite all the difficulties. I recommend myself to the prayers of your holy community, and yours in particular. I am in our Lord, yours. From Paris, November 3rd, 1685. So he's just telling us right there, this is a difficult thing to do, and it was difficult for him as well. But he just kept at it, kept showing up. That's one thing that Danielle was talking about last night, just showing up, just kept showing up. And it makes a difference. It's the only thing that really does, is just keep showing up. Don't worry how you feel about it. Don't worry if you think it's doing any good. He says you're going to think that you're wasting time. But, if you just keep showing up, drip by drip, snowflake by snowflake, it's adding up in ways that you can't even imagine. We use the analogy of an aerobic program where you're going to go running, and you're going to try to do some good for your body and your fitness and all this and that and the other. And you don't see anything happening in the first couple of weeks, except you're sore and you want to quit. But if you persevere, then you start seeing the changes downstream. That motivates you to want to do the workout more. And eventually you start looking forward to the workout itself. And this practice of presence is going to feel the same way. You're not going to see any kind of results right off. It's going to feel like a waste of time. You're going to wonder if you're doing it right, all those kinds of things. But if you keep showing up, things start to change.
Yeah, that's true.
I have this funny thought, Dave. I just I'm reading this and listening to this and thinking, God created us, these human creatures that we are, and he must think of us as these endeared creatures that just push this rock up the hill and we fall down and then we get back up and our ego gets in the way and then we try harder again. And, it must give him a lot of humor that we're doing this and working so hard. But yet he created us like this, to work so hard to do this.
Yeah.
But I guess he's putting it out there in front of us that it's worth it to make this effort, even though we fall off and we have to get back on the horse and stuff. It's just, it must be hilarious.
That's a great image, Kathy. I want you guys, pick a friend, maybe from high school or college, or someone that you just dearly loved, and maybe you still know them now. But if you look back on what endeared you most to that person, is it the things that they really did right and did so well? Or is it the weird eccentricities that they did and the funny things they did and the offbeat things they did? When you think about it, it's really those kinds of imperfections that endear us to people the most. It's the things we miss the most, we laughed over the most, isn't it? And I think God feels the same way about us, just like Kathy's saying.
It reminds me of, with my husband's death. It is not the big moments. I think about these people that take pictures of their food, they put it on Facebook or whatever. Or they show themselves doing these jumping out of airplanes or swimming with dolphins, that I can tell you it's the ordinary things. It's the ordinary day that I miss. The absolutely ordinary moments of just having him in my life, just looking at him and, just knowing he was there. It was just the ordinary moments.
That's perfect. I remember reading a eulogy that was spoken by a woman in her 80s when her husband died. And she was talking about when they went to bed together, that he would fart in bed and blow the covers up, and he snored like a locomotive. And everybody, of course, is just laughing and busting up at the things that she's saying. But then she stops at the end. She says, "I would give anything to have him snoring beside me again." It's those things that maybe annoy you and irritated you in life that become the things that are the most precious. It's the imperfections that make us relatable and accessible. And I think Kathy's point is so well taken. I think it does the same thing for God with us. And yet those are the things that we're trying to hide away and suppress and never show anybody because we think that's what's going to make us acceptable. And yet it's our imperfections that make us the most lovable.
I was reading about this, Dave, that I think Kathy was almost asking, why doesn't God just give up on us? And to me, in the Christian Jewish tradition, we're made in the image of God. So it's actually, it would be impossible for God to give up on us because in a sense, we're his images out there. And so I kind of take comfort in that thought that if we see ourselves in the image of God, it's like God has no choice but to accept us and to keep working with us, even if we keep making mistake after mistake.
Mhm. That's good. This is good stuff. I don't think Kathy was saying that she weren't saying you think God is going to give up on us, though.
No,
You're
not
thinking he
necessarily.
takes
Just-
kind of amusement and pleasure in.
It's an amusement that he created us with his ego that gets in the way and all these distractions that get in our way, and then he just kind of watches us kind of climb back on the mountain and make efforts and try, and it must be totally endearing. It's just, I
Mhm.
can only imagine that mostly, but hopefully he won't give up on us.
Kind of like when our little dog runs to jump up on the bed and misses. Marion and I get the biggest kick out of that.
They get the side of the bed, they keep trying.
Yeah, right.
But the dog doesn't care. She just tries again and makes it the next time. It
Exactly.
doesn't feel any shame or embarrassment. We're laughing at her, but she doesn't care.
My wife does that same thing with me. I try to jump up and get on it and I miss.
Okay, John. That's great.
I don't have the same jumping capabilities as I used to.
I hear you, man. Okay, well, we got a little time here. Let's dive into the fourth letter. This is to somebody new. Oh my gosh. The fourth letter to Mrs. N. Now, we don't know who Mrs. N is. The other translation that I keep referring to has little editorial comments, and his editorial comment on this letter was that it was one of his best letters. He thought it was one of the most succinct and really got these points across. So you'll have to see what you think about this. So he says, Madam, so this is going to be to a not a religious. She's not a nun. She is a civilian, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. So, Madam, I deeply sympathize with you. If you can leave the conduct of your affairs to Mr. and Mrs. N and devote yourself entirely to praying to God, you will have accomplished a great feat. Now, here we are in basically, of course, we're reading somebody else's mail, right? I mean, literally reading someone else's mail. So again, just like the epistles of the New Testament, it's like a Jeopardy game. You're getting the answers, but you don't know the question. So we don't know what's going on in Mrs. N's life, but obviously she's in some kind of distress as well, which obviously is the reason for the letter itself. So he's deeply sympathizing with her, but we don't know why, and it's not going to be revealed in the letter. But it has something to do with what's going on in her family or the logistics of the family. Maybe it's finances, who knows, but it's something like that, because he's saying, if you can leave all of that business to Mr. and Mrs. N and devote yourself entirely to praying to God, you will have accomplished a great feat. The other translation says, you will overthrow the power that presently governs your life with a greater power, which I like that, okay? Because basically what's happened is all of this distress, whatever is consuming her in her family or wherever, is governing her life. It's taking over her life. It's all she can think about and process and do. And I think we can all relate to that. We've all been there, right? But he said, if you can devote yourself entirely to praying to God, practice of the presence, you will overthrow that power that's presently governing your life with a greater power. Right? So he's trying to get her to replace complete focus over here. You can just imagine the hamster wheel in her mind going round and round and round and constantly grinding on whatever the problem happens to be. And then he says about God, God does not ask much of us, merely a thought of him from time to time, a little act of adoration, sometimes to ask for his grace, sometimes to offer him your sufferings, at other times to thank him for the graces, past and present, he has bestowed on you, in the midst of your troubles, to take solace in him as often as you can. Lift up your heart to him during your meals and in company. The least little remembrance will always be most pleasing to him. One need not cry out very loudly. He is nearer to us than we think. I love that.
Oh.
last line.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, he's talking about creating little touchstones during your day. And we talk about this. The ancients would be called to prayer 3 to 4 times a day. And in religious life, you say like when I was in the monastery, we said the office, and we said it 3 times a day. And so these are touchstones. These are calls back to prayer. In Islamic faith, the person in the tower, calls the faithful to prayer, or they know the certain times and they bring out their prayer mat and they face east and they pray. The Jews were called to prayer 3 times a day as well. These are touchstones during the day. It's kind of like a check-in. Where are my emotions? Where's my head at? Can I clear it? Can I come back? Just like when we do our silent prayer at the beginning of these sessions, it's that reset where we can let go of the adrenaline and reset our brains and come back fresh. He's talking about a daily practice of setting up these points during your day, these little touchstones, right? Lift up your heart to him during your meals and in company. The least little remembrance will always be more pleasing. Sometimes a little act of adoration, just thank you, God, for everything that you give to me. Sometimes to ask for grace, asking for help. Sometimes to offer your sufferings, other times to thank him for graces past and present. So there's this constant little drip that he's talking about. If she can start to institute that during her day, these little points will add up to a seamless presence. And the only thing that I would kind of, again, take a look at is that the way that he's phrasing this, it sounds like God is up there withholding his favor, withholding his presence until we ask him, right? Is that what it sounded like to you? Lift up your heart to him during your meals. The least little remembrance will always be most pleasing to him. It's like he's up there waiting for you to do this, and then he will bestow. And the truth is, it's really all about us. God is poured out. There's nothing more that God can pour out on us. But it won't avail us anything until we clear the decks and actually can connect with his presence. But that last line is really beautiful. One need not cry out very loudly. He is nearer to us than we think.
That's so beautiful.
So I'm hoping that also gives you a sense of what we can do. If we're trying to build the kind of practice of presence that Lawrence is talking about, there's a bit of a roadmap there for us.
Mhm.
Think about during your day what you can do to bring remembrance back. And he's talking about grace before meals, not so much to bless the food, but just as another touch point to come back to that sense, bring God back to the forefront and bring presence back to the forefront and connect all those dots. That really is going to install a sense of gratitude. And once you're in a state of gratitude, well, you can't much be anything else.
Mhm.
Certainly not going to be depressed. You're not going to be future tripping. If you're in gratitude, it's because you are really locked in to the present moment. That's where the gratitude resides. So these little drips, these little touch points are really important.
I'm so glad that I was here with all of you listening to that. I
See,
needed,
Linda just did it. She just did a touch point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just to say that, I'm so glad that I'm here with you all. That's like right now, right here, that kind of gratitude, that sense of the togetherness that we feel in our little community. That's it. That's what makes all the difference. Do that 100 times a day, for 100 days, hey, you're there, right?
Wonderful. Never thought I'd come upon something like this, really.
Great. Okay, next line. Another great one for your refrigerator. It is not necessary to be always in church to be with God. Love that. We can make a private chapel of our heart where we can retire from time to time to commune with him peacefully, humbly, lovingly. Everyone is capable of these intimate conversations with God. Some more, others less. He knows what we can do. That's great as well, because how often do we beat ourselves up because we're not as good as such and so over there? I can't do what Brother Lawrence did, and you feel like you know, a used car. But the point is that it doesn't matter. The way he puts it, you know, some can do more, some can do less, but God knows it really just doesn't matter. It's all evened out by the degreeless love of God that's poured out on every one of us equally, no matter what. So there's not one standard that we have to hit. It's just we do what we can do, and all of us can do something. And as we do it, we find out we can do more, and then more, and then more. So that's what he says. Just let us begin. Perhaps he is only waiting for a single generous resolution from us. Now, I would say he's not waiting for anything. He's already made the choices and poured out. But that's the way it sometimes feels, right? Doesn't it feel like God is waiting for us to connect rather than us to clear out what's distracting us from God's connection that's already here? So from a human point of view, that's exactly what it feels like. Have courage. We have little time to live. You are almost 65 and I am approaching 80. Let us live and let us die with God. Suffering will always be more sweet and more pleasant when we are with him. And the greatest pleasures would be a cruel affliction without him. May he be blessed by all. Amen. So he says, you're almost 65 and I'm approaching 80. Well, he's talking pretty loosely about time. And I don't know if this is going to make any difference to you, but I love trying to anchor things in history as much as I can. And so Brother Lawrence was born, as far as we know, the best date we can come up with is 1614. And he died on February 12th, 1691. So he was 77 years old when he died. This letter is undated, but it stands between a letter. If these letters are in chronological order, which it looks like they are, the next dated letter is several letters out. I think it's the 7th letter, and it's dated October 11th, 1688. So he's somewhere around 74 years old when he wrote this letter, you know, by estimating where he died at 77. So he's only 3 years from his death right now, but he calls it approaching 80, even though he's probably closer to 74. But he's getting up there, and he's feeling the weight of his years. He had pleurisy, he had gout, and the gout was so bad in his leg and foot that he could no longer stand and work in the kitchen. So they put him in the shoe repair shop, in the cobbler shop, where he could sit down and work on the shoes. And in the last years of his life were pretty painful because of the pleurisy that eventually killed him. So he's approaching 80. He says, you're a 65. So let's live. You know, let us live and let us die with God. Suffering will always be more sweet and more pleasant when we are with him. He's talking about her suffering, whatever it is she's going through, and he's talking about his health problems at the same time. And the greatest pleasures would be a cruel affliction without him. So the sufferings are sweet with him. The greatest pleasures would be a cruel affliction without him. May he be blessed by all. Amen. Become accustomed then, little by little, to adore him in this way. Demand of him his grace. Offer him your heart from time to time during the day, in the midst of your work, at every moment if you can. Do not burden, or better, do not constrain yourself with rules or particular or private devotions, but act with faith, with love, and with humility. Assure Mr. and Mrs. N and Miss N of my poor prayers, and that I am their servant, particularly yours in the Lord, Brother Lawrence. This idea of coming from faith to total trust once again. How do you do it? I think he says it about as clearly as you can. Become accustomed then little by little to adore him in this way. Demand of him his grace, right? Live as if you expect his love. Offer him your heart from time to time, your full attention, awareness without thinking during the day, in the midst of your work, at every moment if you can. Do not constrain yourself with rules or particular devotions, but act with faith and love and with humility. What did Micah say? You know, do you think that the Lord wants you to burn rivers of oil and thousands of oxen? He says, no. Just love justice, do kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Same thing he's saying here. It's not about all that stuff, but all that stuff can help get you to the end, the presence of God. But don't get caught up in all the things. Just keep coming back to the presence in all these little tiny ways. Pepper them throughout your day. You want to get to total trust? You do it in the smallest of things, not in big spectacular leaps, but just showing up again, moment by moment, little by little. And that's how you get there. I think the other thing, a big principle that we can take from all of this, is that the spiritual life, as Jesus teaches it, and as Brother Lawrence is teaching it, must be concrete. It must be grounded in action. You can't just think about it. You can't abstractly be trying to theologically understand what the spiritual life is about. You actually have to do it. It's in the doings of these little things that add up to a conviction, add up to an actual experience that takes us into that trust. And the trust is really what transforms the experience of our lives. And how do you get there with these little things? But it's got to be real. It's got to be concrete. It's got to be a doing. And that's what Jesus is about over and over again, as well as Brother Lawrence.
This is something that I've really appreciated about this book so far. And also your message that you share as well at church and pretty much through everything is prior experiences. Lori kind of touched on it a little bit. It was more, what can God give me? Or God, give me this and give me that and give me this and give me that. And I want this. Can you make this better? Can you do this better? But really what this book and what you've been talking about so much is it's our responsibility to get into action in so many different ways, like getting into the present moment, getting connected with God, being kind to other people, and all that stuff that we truly want from God comes from being present, and we can only get present through doing the work ourselves. And I don't know if I said that as far as I wanted to get that out, because this plays in every aspect of our lives, in my life. That means like this is literally with everything we do. We can't rely on outside sources to do the things that we want. We have to do it. So this is one of the biggest messages, other than the beauty of being present with God, that I've gotten from this, is putting it back in our hands to be responsible and to really get into action. And like, if we're feeling a certain way or life isn't going a certain way, like, just come back to this moment. Just be present to it. Everything's going to be okay. So that I just really wanted to share that, because even last night, Kathy was talking about the action portion and the things we have to do. And I don't know, for me, it's really important to hear that.
What she said.
Yeah.
Preach it, Allison.
Mhm.
That's perfect. That's it. You know, the onus is on us. God has already spoken. God has done everything. There's nothing left for him to do. We keep asking him for things and he's smacking his head and say, you know, what part of everything don't you understand? You know, I love the image of being sat down at a huge banquet. All the food that you can imagine is just crowding the table, and we're praying for a meal. And God is just like, what can I do? Take and eat, you know? But we can't see the table if we're so distracted. And we
Mhm.
can't get undistracted by trying to will it so. It doesn't work that way. You know, our mind is our problem, kind of like Kathy was saying. It's kind of amusing. God created us with self-awareness, the byproduct of which is this mind that talks to us, right? So how are we going to think our way through the problem when we're using the very tool that is creating the problem? It's kind of like Einstein saying you can't fix a problem using the same thought processes that created the problem in the first place. And so the only way around it is through the actions that he's talking about. Tiny little day by day, moment by moment returnings to the present moment that eventually rewire things.
Yeah.
That's it.
Wonderful. Gotta do it.
So that's why often when someone says that they had this big, you know, conversion moment and God healed everything and God changed everything, it's like, okay, that's wonderful. That's a great, you know, I'm thinking that's a great consolation. You got a burning bush. That's so cool. But if you don't show up tomorrow and the day after and the day after, it's like saying yes on your wedding day and think that that's going to be the push that you need to get through 40 years of marriage. Well, you better be saying yes every day. I do every single day. Otherwise, it becomes I don't.
Mhm.
And it's going to be the same thing with your spiritual life.
You know, I just want to add something here too, just from my own experience with doing this. I mean, I think I didn't come to the effect because of your emphasis on presence and stillness and solitude. But boy, I think I got persuaded pretty quickly after I'd been coming to the effect for maybe, I don't know, 6 months or so. And I remember having a conversation with you, Dave, about like, okay, I don't have an outcome here. You know, I was getting frustrated that I'm not doing it right. And my perfectionist stuff was coming out. And you assured me that it's not about the outcome. It's just showing up. And you know, I've taken so much learning from this reinforcement over the 7 years we've been coming to the effect now, and I've been practicing in a variety of different ways, in what I call my quiet time and my solitude and still place. And you know, I can't say that I've had any burning bushes necessarily, but boy, I feel so much calmer and able to let go of whatever judgment or criticism or resistance that I encounter to life experiences that I'm having, you know, in interaction with, because for me, it usually comes in interaction with other people. And it's, I love what you said about it being you know, this constant drip of little practices. And I didn't realize, you know, that what you said about setting up little touchstones for myself during the day. It's what I've been doing, I think, you know, and just, you know, I think some people, they saw me in my car, I'm just talking to them. I'm just saying, you know, look at that funny thing, or, you know, just appreciating the things on the road that I'm observing, or hearing a song that moves me, and I'll talk to them about it. And it's, I don't know, it's been that immersion, I think, over time that has just transformed me in many ways that I'm astounded by. You know, don't get me wrong, I'm not bragging here, but I'm kind of in wonder about it. It does have an effect. And I've experienced it in the and the relationships with my closest people that I love. Just staying the course and showing up with kindness and love and no advice, no criticism, no opinions, just listening and being compassionate. It has changed me. It's really changing me. I'm not done yet by any shot, but I know I'm starting to create this pathway for myself, and it feels so good. Oh.
That's it. That's the shape of it, and the experience of it. So from what Allison said to what Judy said, I mean, just and Linda and everybody else, that's what it feels like. That, and if we take our eyes off the outcome and put everything into the process, just showing up, the outcome will take care of itself. We don't have to worry about it. In fact, the more you look at it, the farther away it gets. It's just show up. Lose yourself. This is not self-development. This is self-relinquishment. It is so different. It feels so different. If we're trying to develop ourselves, then we're working at odds with ourselves. But when we lose our life, that's when we find it. And so that's the whole point of Jesus' teaching, that paradoxical teaching that he does for us. I know we're really past time, but Ken typed in something that I think is a kind of a significant statement. Ken, can you tell us what you mean? He said, I find this all difficult to hear and necessary in like 45 seconds.
Yeah, right. I've shared my story with you, and I won't reshare it for the group now, but I've had these conversion mountaintop experiences, and lived for 6 years in a really intense, positive, emotional and spiritual place. And I've fallen away from that the last 4 years. But I look back now, and what's hard to hear is I didn't have what Judy's had the last 7 years. Okay. The little tiny bits that have transformed me deeply. I'm not saying the Lord wasn't working in me. I'm saying I'm just beginning to see I fell away because I wasn't transformed deeply through these touch points and these showing ups and these little practicing the presence of God through the day, every day, month after month and year after year. I had nobody to teach me that. So I can only show up today. But yeah, it's kind of difficult to hear because it kind of makes me sad I've lost time. So,
well, here's the good thing about that, Ken. It doesn't matter what time of the day you show up. We all get paid the same.
That's right.
I know the parable.
There you go. Just keep that in mind. This has been, I don't know if did you all think this is one of Brother Lawrence's better letters?
Pretty cool.
I will say this is one of our better discussions, though. So this was a great discussion. Thank you all. And thanks for the contributions you made and the transparency that you showed, because this was a great discussion. And hopefully some things kind of clicked into place. Beautiful. All right. The East Coast is getting late. So Scotty.
Lord, we're so grateful to be here with each other and with you. The things that we learn, and sometimes we laugh at, and we cry at, and we get angry at, and we rage against the machine. We have every expression, all the intricate design you placed when designing us that allows us to have these experiences. One of the great gifts you give us is the ability to lift each other up, encourage each other, and pray for each other. So we want to pray for Becky and Beth and Brady and Ann and Bob and Jordana and Linda and everybody. We can list everybody in the whole church worldwide, because we all need something, Lord. What we need most of all is a close, intimate, abiding relationship with you. And the more we realize the things you say about us are true, and how you feel about us and care for us are true, the more reassurance we get, the smoother the journey becomes, even when it's rough. Having your word to smooth it out sure helps us for the ride, Lord. So be with us now as we go about our day and nights, and help us to lift each other up and stay closely connected to you. It's in your holy and precious name, Lord Jesus, we pray and we give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
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 And
Thanks, everybody. See you Sunday.
Thank you. Thanks.
love you guys.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye.
Take care.
Good night. Farewell. Adieu, adieu, adieu.
And you,
You know the song. Very good. Good night, William.
Bye,
Get some
William.
sleep. Sleep fast. Yeah. And Jordana and Linda too, and Kelly, if you're there. Good night, y'all.
We'll see you on Sunday.
See you Sunday and Saturday. All right.
Yeah.